But on the 12th of August 1942, the Soviet leadership thought help was on the way. Winston Churchill was the first British Prime Minister to visit Moscow since the Russian Revolution. But it was perhaps just as well that Churchill didn't know what Stalin had said privately about the British in 1939, when the Soviets had been friends with the Germans.
Я не люблю англичан и не доверяю им. Они хитрые и упорные противники. Английская армия слаба. И если, несмотря на это, англичане господствуют в мире, то это происходит из-за глупости других стран.
We will continue hand in hand like comrades and brothers until every vestige of the Nazi regime has been beaten into the ground.
The British delegation knew the forthcoming meeting with Stalin was likely to be difficult. As one of Churchill's generals later said, "We were going into the lion's den, and we weren't going to feed him."
Let's start.
The Soviets had been demanding the Western Allies launch an immediate invasion of France, a so-called Second Front, to take the pressure off the Red Army. But Churchill carried bad news.
I wish to speak frankly and would like to invite complete frankness in return. The British and American governments do not feel themselves able to undertake a major operation in September.
The British minutes describe Stalin as looking very glum at this point. Churchill sought to lighten his mood with plans of how the British could still help.
We hope to shatter 20 German cities, as we have shattered Cologne, Lübeck, Düsseldorf, and so on. More and more aeroplanes and bigger bombs. If need be, as the war goes on, we hope to shatter almost every dwelling in every German city.
Later in the war, Churchill sought to distance himself from the deliberate bombing of civilian targets. But in the meeting with Stalin, he was enthusiastic about the campaign, saying, "We seek no mercy, and will show no mercy." Churchill's remarks about the bombing made the atmosphere in the meeting, according to the British minutes, progressively more cordial. Something that was further helped by Churchill's news that there would be a sort of second front after all. Just not where Stalin had expected it.
We will seize the north coast of French Africa, the whole of it. 250,000 men have been set aside for this purpose.
Да поможет вам Бог в этом.
But the atmosphere worsened the next day. Stalin sent Churchill a note accusing the British of breaking an alleged promise to mount a second front in 1942 and taking action that prejudices the plan of the Soviet command. The mood was grim, something that wasn't reflected on the newsreels.
There's not the slightest doubt that the President of the Council of the People's Commissars, in other words, Joseph Stalin, and Prime Minister Winston Churchill got on tremendously well. It could hardly be otherwise between two men of such outstanding experience and ability.
Off-screen, there was yet another subject of disagreement. The Arctic convoys to the Soviet Union had suffered severe losses and had recently been postponed. Something Stalin was still sore about when he dined with Churchill on the last day of the British visit.
Может быть, английский военно-морской флот Не имеет чувства гордости.
You must take it from me that what was done was right. I really do know a lot about the Navy and Sea War.
Значит, я ничего не понимаю в этом.
Russia is a land animal. The British are sea animals.
Churchill still tried to form a personal bond with Stalin, even though the two of them had virtually nothing in common.
Have the stresses of this war been as difficult for you personally as carrying through the policy of collective farms?
Войны так же тяжелы для вас лично, как и проведение коллективизации.
Нет, это было особо тяжело.
What did you do with all the rich peasants, the kulaks?
Как вы поступили с кулаками?
Мы их перебили.
Mr. Stalin says we killed them.
In the face of Stalin's admission that the Soviets had committed acts of mass killing before the war, Churchill passed no judgment. He later explained that, with the World War going on all round us, it seemed vain to moralize aloud. But the moral questions about dealing with Stalin were about to reach a point where they couldn't be ignored. In 1939, the Soviets had imprisoned several thousand Polish officers. Now, nearly 3 years later, these people seemed to have disappeared. It was a mystery that understandably obsessed the many Polish soldiers who were serving in the British Army. General Anders, commander of the Polish Second Corps, caught up with Winston Churchill when he stopped over in Cairo on his way back home after the meeting with Stalin.
Chciałbym zwrócić uwagę pana premiera na fakt zaginięcia wielkiej ilości naszych zawodowych oficerów, którzy byli uwięzieni w Rosji sowieckiej. Nie udało mi się uzyskać żadnych wiadomości o nich.
It may be that the Russians are averse to letting the officers go for fear of the stories they might spread about their treatment in Russia.
Nie ma żadnego poczucia sprawiedliwości ani honoru w Rosji sowieckiej. Ani żadnego człowieka w tym kraju, którego słowu można by wierzyć.
Well, I must say, General, it would be very dangerous to use such language in public. No good can come of antagonizing the Russians.
Churchill tried to keep a careful balance between Poland and the Soviet Union. He knew he needed Stalin's help to beat the Nazis, but he was also well aware that Britain had gone to war in order to protect Polish independence.
Let me say that it is my hope and belief that Poland will emerge from this war a strong and a happy country.
Silny i szczęśliwy kraj.